Councilmember Gauthier, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about what I think is a significant package of legislation that you proposed in the last session called the People's Preservation Package?
Yeah, so the People's Preservation Package is an effort to preserve valuable, affordable housing across Philadelphia. I think you all know that we've been experiencing a housing crisis in Philadelphia for a long time. If we look at across the city at, in particular, housing units that are made affordable through time-limited subsidies. We have about 5,400 of those units that will have their subsidies expire in the next 5 years across the city. 900 of those are in the 3rd District in West and Southwest. And if you look across the city to 10 years, that number doubles. So that's thousands of families that could be at risk of losing their affordable housing. And so the People's Preservation Package attempts to disrupt that dynamic. So one, it requires property owners to notify not only tenants, but other affordable housing providers and community groups, as well as the city, when they intend to end an affordable housing contract and sell their properties. It also requires that those property owners allow an opportunity for other affordable housing providers, the city, or tenants to put up an offer to buy those properties before others who might not intend to keep them affordable are allowed to. And it also requires the city to keep a directory of housing units that are backed by time-limited subsidies so that we have more time to figure out what we do to save those units, and so that we have more time to hopefully develop a plan to save, those thousands of units and keep them in service as affordable housing at a time when our city critically needs that. And lastly, it also calls for a hearing in the Housing Committee on Section 8 voucher discrimination. We know that every day people are doing their best to use Section 8 vouchers to find affordable housing, but 65% of landlords are not accepting vouchers. And so we have this critical tool to help people find affordable housing, but those same people are being discriminated against in the private housing market, which is illegal. And so we want to have a hearing to look at these discriminatory practices and to see what we can do at a city level or at other levels of government to bring that to an end, because everybody deserves affordable housing. So for us, this is a very critical package that reflects, what's going on in the city, and it is attempting to find an equitable and just solution.
And that voucher piece, I think, is really important. I think you told me about that a while ago, that there's this broad discrimination against Section 8 vouchers that I was not aware of at the time. And
yep,
one of the things you read a lot about when we talk about housing as well, more Section 8 vouchers, and then you realize, well, no, that's not an answer right now because there's so many people who don't accept them. So that's very interesting here. Do you know, is there any idea when the hearings might be scheduled?
I know we are going to have the hearing sometime this spring, but we don't have an exact date yet.
Okay, it's very interesting. We're gonna be following up on that. I think it's really important. So when we talk about, now let's look forward a little bit. What are you looking forward to this spring in terms of the legislative agenda for you and City Council?
Sure. Well, the housing package that I talked about will be a big piece of what we're focused on and getting that across those bills across the finish line. Beyond that, gun violence, I've focused on gun violence as a priority issue since I started in office in 2020. I continue to push the Kennedy administration to develop a more urgent response. This session, I want to focus specifically on youth gun violence. We've been seeing more and more young people getting involved in acts of gun violence, whether as victims and also as perpetrators. At the same time, as a city, we haven't uncovered many prevention or intervention programs that are directly focused on youth who might be in a cycle of violence. And so I think that that's something that our city has to do more successfully if we're going to, remove people from young people from a cycle of violence and put them on the path to opportunity. So I intend to have a hearing this session specifically on youth involved in gun violence and better ways that our city can intervene in that activity. And I'm hoping to uncover solutions through that hearing that can inform, funding for youth gun violence initiatives and policy, as well as any budget implications. Additionally, this session, I'm also really focused on workforce development. So, the third district, West and Southwest in particular, is becoming a hub for the life sciences. So we're seeing millions of square feet of commercial space that has been developed or is in development. And it's my aim that Black and Brown West and Southwest Philadelphians in particular will be a part of that economic activity and will benefit from that economic activity. We've seen so many cities like, San Francisco or like, parts of Boston where the economy grew and people were pushed out. And I think here in Philadelphia, we have the opportunity to benefit from the growth of the life sciences sector while not displacing our residents. But we can only do that if we're very intentional about workforce development and training opportunities. And so while I think our city is very focused on the economic development piece, I don't think we're focused enough on the training piece, specifically for people in our neighborhoods. And I want to make that a focus of mine and City Council because West and Southwest Philadelphia is such a hub for that activity. And, I'll continue to focus on public spaces. That has been a big drive of mine since I've come into office. I've been able to direct millions of dollars to public spaces, specifically in Black and Brown neighborhoods, because I believe, our kids deserve the same amenities as kids who live in wealthier and whiter areas. One huge accomplishment for me last session that will carry into this one is that I was able to secure in total $3.5 million for the renovation of the Sayre pool. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this pool, but it's a huge Olympic-sized indoor pool in West Philadelphia that has been closed for years. It's owned by the school district and it fell into disrepair some time ago. And it went from being this historic space that was open to our community and also a space where we were able to train lifeguards who work across the city to a closed asset at a time when gun violence and youth gun violence is soaring. And so I was able to, get council to commit $3.5 million towards the renovation of this pool. And my push this session is to get the school district to be a partner in committing about $4 million to get that pool open to the public. Enough is enough and the community deserves this resource. And so that's a big push for me with respect to the Sayre pool, but also with respect to public spaces in general. And then lastly, I would say continuing my Just Services PHL push. So last year I had a budget campaign called Just Services PHL, where I was really pushing on the administration to put resources in the budget that would allow us to serve our neighborhoods better. And in particular, Black and Brown neighborhoods suffering from gun violence. Every day we're getting calls to the office about trash not being picked up, about illegal dumping that happens over and over and over again, about street lights being out in areas where there are shootings, about abandoned cars, about problem properties. I think during the pandemic, the city has really been struggling to deliver high quality services. But at the same time, we know that if we clean and green, blocks that are experiencing gun violence, we could see dramatic improvements, right? We can reduce shootings by 30% 30% is shown if we concentrate cleaning and greening and other improvements on blocks that are really struggling. So my push through Just Services PHL was to get better and more dependable city services, and to have a targeting of those services in the communities that are most crippled by gun violence in this moment. And so I will bring back that campaign for the FY24 budget as well. So it'll be a pretty full session, but I'm excited about the things that I'm focused on.
Yeah, and that's a significant amount of work you're doing, specifically with the pool. When we're talking about youth gun violence, you have to give young people a place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, that's it. So even though it's a little too early to do this yet, what I'm a little curious about, we're going to be in budget season soon enough. Is there a certain way you're approaching this year's budget hearings, given that there's a little bit more of a surplus and maybe a little bit more room? Are there certain things you're looking for?
Well, I think this year's budget will be important, right? We have a surplus, but we also have an outgoing mayor, and we have to make sure that our important priorities are shored up, right, going into 2024. And so that's the frame of mind that I'm going into this budget season with. And I think many of the things that I talked to you about, like from a policy perspective, also will have budget implications. We're going to have to make sure that we have adequate robust funding for affordable housing. That will continue to be a huge need in our communities. And that's something that I fought for every single budget. Just Services PHL, that makes this push on city services. We're going to have to make sure that we get money to the agencies that will allow them to deliver to our constituents in the way that they deserve. So that, that's money for streets, that's money, so that we can appropriately deal with illegal dumping and abandoned car removal. So making sure that city agencies are shored up. The workforce development piece is also something that I'll be looking towards. I think that our city has to invest in the training programs that are going to allow Black and Brown Philadelphians to be inside those new labs, to be inside those manufacturing facilities. As these new developments are popping up, I don't want our residents to be the ones, or just the ones in the mailroom, or just the ones, that are on the construction site. We deserve to be a part of this new life sciences boom, and to have the lucrative career pipelines that will come out of that. And I think the city is going to have to invest some resources in making sure that the training programs are available. And then gun violence. Every year since 2020, I've been a part of a coalition of council that has pushed for historic and record amounts of funding towards violence prevention and intervention initiatives. We've set a baseline that is not going to go away. And I think we also have to have an eye towards making sure that we're thinking specifically about youth that are involved in gun violence, and that those programs can, adequately intervene in youth violence activity. So those are some of the things. Many of the things I'm looking at on the policy side also have a budget implication.
I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia.
Thanks, Larry. And thank you for joining us today, Council Member. We really appreciate it. I guess my question, and it kind of piggyback on what you were talking about in terms of money for gun violence prevention and the fact that that's a priority. One of the things that a lot of folks have been asking about is how effective has this money been? Has that discussion come up? And if so, what are you finding in terms of the effectiveness of this money?
First, I'll start by saying, I think it's really important to support the community groups that are on the ground doing violence prevention work. For many years, a lot of these groups have been doing work, kind of bootstrapping it, getting funding wherever they can, and I don't think that that's right. At the same time, I do think we need more and better data from the administration about how things are working. I know that they're working on that, and council's still waiting to see that. I also would like to see smaller grants go towards more grassroots efforts. One of the things that I didn't so much like about the infusion of money that we put into gun violence prevention is that we made these really super big and complicated grants. So most of that money went towards grants that were in the size of between the size of $100,000 and $1 million, which necessitated a pretty complicated grant application process. I think we need to get money in smaller amounts to really grassroots organizations that know the players, that can reach youth within their neighborhoods, and that can effectively stop or allay gun violence activity if they have more resources. And so I think that's something that we're still working towards, if I'm being honest. At the same time, I do firmly believe that we have to support credible people in the community who know this work and who are doing the work every day.
Okay, now, in terms of gun violence itself, everyone, at least on some level, can agree that there are root causes to gun violence, things like poverty and lack of opportunity and things like that. Is this, during this council session, do you see that being approached in terms of the budget? Because once upon a time, before the pandemic, Council President Clark had his moonshot for poverty, that he wanted to, get rid of poverty or at least reduce it in like a 4-year program. Does that come up this year, or what do you think should be done in terms of addressing the root causes of gun violence?
Sure. So I am a firm believer that our approach to gun violence has to go beyond enforcement. It has to be comprehensive, and it has to include investments in the places that are most struggling from gun violence and the people who are directly involved. And it has to get at those root causes. And so through my work, here are a few ways that I'm trying to get at that. One, through the Just Services PHL campaign. If you look at the places where gun violence is happening, it's happening in areas that were redlined, and it's happening in areas that have been massively disinvested by government and other players for decades and decades and decades. And so to me, a key part of making those communities safe is investing in those communities and making them cleaner, greener, more beautiful, and with more access to opportunity within people's specific neighborhoods. The other piece of that, I think, is investing directly into the people. So for instance, with the hearing that I'm doing on youth gun violence, I'm trying to uncover what the sort of indicators are for young people that are getting involved in gun violence. Is it that they're truant? Is it that, they've been through the foster care system? Is it that, they went to the juvenile justice center and they never got any help to turn them, onto a different path when they came out of JJSC? I do agree with you that we have to zone in on the specific factors that are driving people towards violence, and we have to come up with solutions that will alleviate those factors. And it's worth our while to do that, right? It's worth our while to invest in people in a way that matters, because the cost of violence is enormous. It's an enormous cost and toll on the city. It's worth our while to make massive investments in neighborhoods that have been disinvested and are therefore seeing violence because of the enormous toll and cost of violence on the city of Philadelphia. And so I am going to certainly be focused on those root factors and how to more firmly get towards them so that we can eliminate violence in our city. And I think other council members are thinking the same way as well. There are several council members who've been really strong on gun violence traditionally. Councilmember Jones, Councilmember Johnson, the council president. So I think you'll see other people focusing on those root factors as well.
Now, this is an election year, whether we like it or not. You have the mayor and all the members of council that are up for re-election. And traditionally, that has made the actual practice of governing more interesting than it ought to be.
Okay.
Now, this is your first re-election, correct?
Yeah.
How, I guess, have you gotten any advice from anyone on how to handle this intersection between politics and governance?
No, this is the first time that I'll be running as a sitting council member. So I kind of, I don't really know I don't have a full roadmap. I don't think there is a roadmap, or if there is, it hasn't been given to me, but I'd like to see it if it's there.
Okay, so do you think that because we are in that intersection of electoral politics and actual governance, that things will be harder to do on some level? And how do you personally, based on how you perceive or approach governance, approach that?
Things will be harder. One, I have an amazing staff team that I've been able to build up over the last several years. They believe in, the vision that I've set forward, and they're working really hard on it. And so if I'm being pulled, in certain ways, and I have a team here who is driving all of the work that I just described to you all. Secondly, I'm running on my work. I feel really proud of what I've been able to do over the last 3 years, and I'm confident that if I continue to do work that matters to the people, that I'm going to be here for the next term as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, council member. I'm turning you back over to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right, well, Councilmember Jamie Gauthier, and I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege here. You're from the 3rd District, the best district, because that's where I live. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.